right, well, let's finish up this chapter by talking about ways that we can apply the motivational theories to specific organizational problems. So we have three main ways that this kind of research or these kinds of theories are used. There's organizational behavior management. I have a little cartoon of some mice sitting around the conference table, and the one, the CEO mouse is showing the maze, and he's like, okay, here's the plan. Then we have the goal setting and management by objectives method, and here we have the boss apparently counseling a employee, and it says, so there's 5% more for coming to work, 5% for being on time, and a bonus for returning promptly from lunch. Nice goals. All right. And then we have the job enrichment and job crafting approach. And here we have Lucy saying, I've always wondered why you decided to be a dog. And Snoopy says, I was fooled by the job description. So, all right. Oh, I don't know if anybody else thinks my little cartoons are funny, but I find them amusing. So anyway, so let's talk about applied behavior analysis, the ABC model. It's called the ABC model because we're going to be assessing antecedents, behavior, and consequences in this model. So it's an application of behavioral psych principles, and we're going to be studying and controlling individual and group behavior in organizational settings. And it is exactly what that sounded like. We're going to be studying and controlling individual and group behavior. When we talk about behavioral psych, we're always going to be talking about ways that we can cause our learner, is how behavioral psychologists would talk about them, how we can cause our learner to behave in the ways that we want them to through the application of consequences, rewards for desirable behavior and punishments for undesirable behavior, in an effort to increase the desirable behaviors and reduce the undesirable ones. All right, so we call this the ABC model. So for A, we are going to target the behaviors that need change. So the first part of the approach is to figure out, what behaviors are non-productive or undesirable. And then we're going to establish the baseline for these target behaviors. If the baseline is that these behaviors are very rarely displayed, it might not be worth going through the process. If, on the other hand, the behaviors are fairly common, fairly widespread, then we may want to go ahead and follow the process. Next, we're going to examine the links between current rewards and punishments and then behaviors. So we're going to look to see whether it's possible that these undesirable behaviors are being displayed because we're accidentally rewarding them. So if that's what we discover, we might want to stop accidentally rewarding behavior that we don't want. Like, if we're accidentally encouraging people to be late to work by, they get to be late and nothing happens to them, so it's technically a reward, right? We might want to change that so that we start having punishments for undesirable behavior and rewards for desirable behavior. Now that sounds super easy, but we have to remember that all of us vary on what we would find punishing and what we would find rewarding. There are some things that are sort of universally rewarding, but if a person already has enough of the thing that's universally rewarding, they may not be motivated to work for it. So it's really tricky to actually make sure that we are rewarding desirable behaviors and punishing undesirable behaviors. So once we have figured out the link between what we are currently doing and then the behaviors, we're going to come up with an intervention program that sets goals and links rewards to goal attainment, so that actually we are not rewarding undesirable extraneous behaviors, but instead you only get rewards for achieving the goals that we have as an organization. And then we go back and we evaluate how effective the program was in the final part. So we've got the antecedents, like what's leading up to the behavior. We've got the behaviors, and then we've got the consequences that follow those behaviors. And that's the basic applied behavior analysis. So if, for example, we're concerned about our employees arriving on time, and the goal is everybody's, at their desks at 8 a.m. or whatever, we would want to set up a program that allows us to provide rewards for desirable behavior. Skinner, who first developed the operant conditioning model that this applied behavior analysis is based on, said that the most effective thing to do with undesirable behaviors is ignore them. Because if you don't ignore them, you run the risk that your punishment is actually a reward, and you're trying to punish the behavior, but you're actually encouraging it. So he said the most effective thing to do is ignore the undesirable behaviors and then reward the desirable ones. And so we would want to try and follow that process as much as we possibly could as we're trying to shape our employees' behaviors towards the desirable goals that we have for the group or for the individual. Ideally, the individual doesn't even really know that they're being rewarded or ignored, or if we had to, punished. We would want it to be set up in such a way that the consequences seem really natural to the person who's displaying the behavior. So it seems like, oh, if I do this, this is what naturally happens, and I want it to happen or I don't want it to happen, and that'll affect my behavior in the future. According to this kind of operant conditioning model, we can tell that a behavior has been reinforced because it's continuing to be displayed. We can tell that a learning behavior has been punished because it has been extinguished or it's been eliminated from the repertoire. So through the application of rewards and punishments or ignoring, we're going to try and control our individuals or our groups into doing what we want them to do. Yay, control. As a person doing the controlling, it's probably less offensive than if you are the person being controlled. How about something a little bit less controlling? Goal setting and management by objectives. It's a system for establishing work-related goals. And there's a procedure for assessing performance compared with the goals. So this is much more collaborative than the last example, the ABC model. Here, managers and subordinates are going to jointly set objectives for a specified time period. So we don't sit down and say, for the entire time that you work for this company, this is what we hope is going to happen. We don't say that. We say, over the next 6 months, this is what we, as a pairing, have decided the subordinate should accomplish during the next 6 months. It might be an increase in sales, or it might be, X number of, exemplary ratings on their customer service calls, or whatever it is, right? They jointly set those objectives, and it's for a specified time, which means at the end of that time, we're going to reassess. The subordinates develop an action plan to achieve the goals. So they've had buy-in on the goal because they worked on it together with their manager. It isn't something that was imposed on them. And so the subordinates are going to try and figure out, how can I achieve the goal? And then the managers are going to conduct a performance review to examine progress and give feedback. And this participatory setting of objectives will occur again for the next period. So we're going to sit down, we're going to review how well the goals were met for this period, and then we're going to set new objectives for the next period. So the idea is that because there's a collaboration and the subordinates are involved in the planning and everything, that there'll be greater motivation to achieve the goals. That the feedback will help to provide the information that the subordinate needs to adjust their behavior for the next period and things like that. One red flag I have on this system is that it is contingent on the subordinates to develop their action plan to achieve the goals. And one of the most unmotivating things is to be placed in a position where you're supposed to figure out how to solve a problem and you don't feel like you have the tools or the resources to do it. So if a subordinate is supposed to develop an action plan, but they don't really know how or what they should use or what the bar should be set while they're sitting at that joint meeting deciding on their objectives for the time period, if they don't really know what the goal should be, they may be setting themselves up for trouble in the future because they set a really high goal for this time period. Let's say they achieved it. Obviously, the next time period is going to be, well, do more. And so sometimes subordinates can sort of be put into a position of, working way harder than they probably should be, putting too much time into it and things like that. And so that they are perpetually like a mouse in a wheel and dissatisfied, and that can undermine the ultimate goal, which was to get an employee who's satisfied and who's working hard and intrinsically motivated and all those things. And then the other part is they could end up frustrated because they don't know how to go about setting up a doable action plan. The last topic is job enrichment and job crafting. So job enrichment says we can increase motivation by strengthening the core job dimensions. Now this list will look very familiar because they were on a previous model, right? There's sort of this basic underlying assumption that motivation will always be tied to greater skill variety, or always will be tied to having a significant task to perform, or will be tied to having a feeling of autonomy. And as we've already talked about in this chapter, not all workers have those same motives, right? For some workers, literally doing the same thing every day is awesome. They can plan the book that they're writing, or they can, do other things in their head by doing this repetitious job, right? It's not always the case that people are more satisfied by what the theorists think they should be more satisfied by. So some people have complained that the goal of job enrichment needs to be more narrowly tailored to the individual. Like, what would make you feel like this job was more enriching? What would make you feel like this job is meeting your intrinsic motivations better? So job crafting. Employees have the flexibility to customize or modify their own job. Okay, so instead of imposing so-called enrichment, the employees are going to customize or modify their job. So the organization is going to make what are called idiosyncratic deals with each employee. They're called ideals. So that each employee kind of customizes how they do their work. They negotiate directly with their supervisors about their own job conditions and their own arrangements. This is where innovative ideas like flex time and other things came into the workplace, was through ideals, where employees who were valued by the company for having been good employees maybe had a lifestyle change, maybe had a baby, or are caring for their elderly parents, or something has changed. And so they went to their employer and said, I really want to continue working here, but I can't continue to work here on an 8-hour shift. So I was wondering if we could do this or that. Or, for my partner's employment, we are actually living an hour's drive from work in traffic. But if I could come an hour after traffic ends, I could make that commute in 30 minutes and my whole lifestyle would be better. And so these kind of little negotiations can happen one by one with these idiosyncratic ideals. In general, ideals are related to the employee perceiving that they have more favorable job characteristics because they are suited to what they want. They show greater initiative on the job and they are more engaged in the job. So it seems like it's worthwhile to an organization to do these ideals as much as they possibly can. Now, of course, there are certain constraints, right? Certain kinds of organizations need staffing during certain hours, or you must be on the premises because we have, private information that you can't work on from a distance, or other kinds of things, right? So you can imagine there are situations where there might be limitations to the kinds of ideals that a company could make or an organization could make. But when there's this spirit that an employee could craft their own job, there are all these benefits that can come from it. Now, I have to throw in some downsides. I didn't put them on the slide, but I have to throw in some downsides because a lot of times people will make their own ideal and they're like, oh, I did a good job, but this is how I want it to be. I crafted it well. And then they find out what somebody else had negotiated and they're like, man, I should have thrown that in. And sometimes they can be dissatisfied as a result of that because they realize that there were other things that they could have asked for that they didn't even think were on the table. Because usually the organization doesn't come in and say, here's what you can pick from. They usually come in and say, what do you need? And so it's up to the employee to negotiate with their supervisor. A lot of times employees are dissatisfied with this process because some employees don't have the confidence to negotiate. So if the employer says, oh, well, I don't know if that's going to work, the employee might just back off and go, oh, okay, never mind. When in fact, this was something that would have really made their job much more favorable. And they would have been much more engaged as a result of it, but they weren't willing, they didn't have the nerve to sort of push back. And so job crafting can be tricky. It's not present in all kinds of jobs, but it can really contribute to benefits for the corporation or the organization over the long run. All right, so that concludes all of our different motivational factors, and I will see you guys back in the next chapter.